Hello everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of 2021 from the HRB Trial Methodologies Research Network. I'm Vivian Hanrahan, the webinar coordinator for the TMRN, and we'd like to extend the warmest of welcomes to you all during this lockdown. Whether you're joining us today from your office, your home office, the spare room, or even the cupboard under the stairs, you're all very welcome. So to kick off the presentations for this year, we are really delighted and honoured to have Clare Relton present to us today. So Claire is joining us to talk about her topic, which is the introduction of trials within cohorts, or TwiCs. Claire is a senior lecturer in clinical trials at the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Unit at Queen Mary University of London. She specialises in the design of randomised controlled trials that generate real-world evidence, especially trials within cohorts. Her methodological research focuses on innovative recruitment and informed consent processes, particularly those that help health providers continually learn from the care that they deliver, i.e. learning health systems. So before I hand you over to Claire, who's going to share her screen in just a moment, I just want to turn your attention to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. So if you hover over the bottom, everyone's so used to Zoom now, you don't need my instructions on this. But if you have a question, you could put it in the Q&A box or indeed in the chat box. And at the end of the presentation, I'll put your questions to Claire. So without further ado now, I'm going to ask Claire if you can share your screen, if that's okay.
Hi everybody. Yes, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm just sorting my screens out. Let's have a look. So, okay, so I just need to share the right screen now, don't I?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Hang on, everybody. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Oh, hang on.
No.
Let's go.
Okay, something's coming. Yes, perfect.
Brilliant.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Okay, I am here if you need me, but I will mute in the meantime. So I'll hand over to you, Claire.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much for the introduction. And thank you very much, Francis and the team for inviting me. I'm delighted to talk to you today. Just wanted to add in terms of what I specialise in, I also specialise in food research at a population level. I get really excited about that as well. Yes, I'm a senior lecturer in clinical trials. I'm based in the Centre for Clinical Trials and Methodology in the Institute of Population Health Sciences based at Queen Mary University in London. And I also work within something called the Pragmatic Clinical Trials Unit. So here today, I'm delighted that you've joined me all, and I'm going to describe the journey of one approach that I've been really interested in to trial design that's designed to improve the design and conduct of trials. And it's my interest has always been at the pragmatic end of the trial, the spectrum, the pragmatic explanatory trial spectrum. And I'm going to talk to you today about how this particular approach, which is commonly known as TwiCs, trials within cohorts, about how it developed, how it's being used, how people are interpreting this design and adapting it, and how the design's evolved. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the end, if possible, talking about the future, how this, what's its future in this complex, fast-changing ecosystem that we are in of intervention trials. So a little bit about my background. I'm not a statistician or a medically trained doctor, but actually I started life as a CAM therapist. My first experience of being in a trial was very interesting, and I observed how everything changed when the trial started. So it was a trial of chronic fatigue syndrome, and I was one of the clinicians delivering the particular type of CAM therapy. And I've been doing that for years with my colleagues, and then the trial started, and I observed that everybody behaved differently, and I including myself and my patients, and I thought, what's going on here? I ended up then doing a PhD, and I had the honour of working with Professor John Nichol, who had commissioned something like over 1,000 trials in his time, and I was starting to design trials because I was really interested in it, and he was very helpful as a supervisor. And the TwiCs design is a combination of is the output of the work that we did together doing my PhD. So it was definitely a co-creation. I was very interested in making trials real and practical, because that had been my experience, has been in the real practical world as a clinician. How on earth does this trial, why isn't it working, and what information is this going to provide, and is it going to be useful to me and my patients? And then he was really interested in how can you make trials more efficient. He commissioned many, many trials, but of course, we all know trials cost huge amounts of money. So how can we make the whole system, and also very slow. So he was thinking, well, how on earth can we make this whole process quicker? So yeah, let's just, oh, hang on. So let me get the right, click the right thing. Yeah, so let me just get my slides in order, hang on. So we know that the standard approach to trials up until certainly a few years ago was that we would start a trial, we would create an infrastructure for that trial in order to identify and recruit people, collect the data and run the trial. And as we know, trials are very expensive and a huge amount of the millions of pounds that are spent on trials is often to set up and operate the infrastructure costs. We also know that in those trials, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, so what we did doing my PhD is...
Sorry to interrupt you. Your screen hasn't moved on. Were you expecting it to?
No, that's fine. I'll move on in a bit.
That's okay. Perfect. I was just in case it wasn't working.
Yeah, no, thanks for checking, Viv. So what we did was, John, Nicola and I, we designed, piloted and feasibility tested a new trial architecture, is what I'm calling it. And then we got it published. So I'll briefly go through what the key features of trials within cohorts are. So apologies to those of you who already know this, but basically the idea is you have a large observational cohort of people with a condition of interest, and you measure their outcomes, hopefully on a regular basis. You make sure that the information you give and the consents that you seek are patient-centered, i.e. that are acceptable to the patient and honour the patient journey. And this cohort provides a capacity for multiple trials. And then for each trial embedded within the cohort, you identify those who are eligible for that particular trial, and you randomly select some to receive the trial intervention, and you compare their outcomes with those eligible but not randomly selected. So this approach is useful for trials where you've got treatment as usual as the comparator. So TwiCs is a type of an approach to the architecture of how you design trials for the pragmatic end of the spectrum for trials of interventions, and it's particularly suitable for where you have treatment as usual as the comparator. Oops. So the benefits of this approach is that it provides a facility for multiple trials. You get long-term outcomes as standard. As we know, most trials, they finish after a year, but actually for many conditions that we're studying, we would actually really like to have longer-term data. You get ongoing information on treatment as usual and the condition. You get increased comparability between each trial conducted within the cohort, and hopefully increased efficiency, i.e. you get rapid recruitment because you've already got a cohort who are research ready, on whom you've got baseline data, and because you're not sort of trying to find enough people, you've already got enough people, it gives you opportunities for unequal randomization. You don't necessarily always need to do 1-to-1 randomization. You could do 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, which would have benefits for expensive treatments. And you also get information on the acceptability of the intervention. So we published the design, the BMJ, in 2010, so that's over 10 years ago now. And then a couple of years later, we published the feasibility study, which was this particular trial of treatment by homeopath for women with menopausal hot flushes. We've been doing when we started doing some digging, we realized that this actually wasn't the first example of this design. That way back in 2004, people in the Maastricht University in the Netherlands had actually also done something. They called it a comprehensive prognostic cohort study. So it's not the newest idea on the block. So let's talk about the patient-centered consent angle. So when a patient is approached to take part in a trial, there's lots of information and lots of uncertainty that patient is subject to. So they're asked to provide data for research, to have their data linked maybe for their data to be used in an intervention study, to be contacted again, to be randomized. I mean, what does it mean to be randomized? To be offered treatment and to receive the treatment. So the patient thinks, well, what on earth am I consenting to here? Am I consenting to be treated? Well, that's easy. I know whether or not I want the treatment. Do I want to take part in research? Well, what does it mean? Well, people other than my doctor are going to observe me. Oh gosh, it's randomization. The doctor actually doesn't know which is the best treatment. I thought he did. That's why I came to see them. I'm not going to have any control over which treatment I get, and nor is my clinician. And then for placebo trials, which I know is not quite the area we're talking about, there's also the possibility I'll get a dummy treatment and I won't know if it is or not, and neither will my doctor. So you can see the high levels of uncertainty that patients are subject to when they're approached to take part in trials using the standard approach where we give full information about everything that might or might not happen to them at the beginning of the trial. So we were very keen to have this particular aspect of the design, the TwiCs design. It was originally called the Cohort Multiple RCT design, but over the years we evolved a much more snappy name, the TwiCs design. But we were very keen to have this element in, that the fact that the information and consent should be patient or person-centered. That is, the process of obtaining information and consent is as similar as possible to that which happens in routine world healthcare, in real-world routine healthcare. I.e., clinicians provide patients with the information that the patient needs when they need it, i.e. the information is staged and tailored to the patient and the particular point on the patient's journey. So patients are not told about treatments that they will not receive or not be offered. And nor are they told that their treatment will be allocated by chance. You can actually say to a patient, well, you have been randomly selected to try this treatment. That's a much easier conversation, but to say to a patient that your treatment will be decided by chance is a much more awkward conversation for any clinician to have. So if you want to see a great example of the pain of a standard approach to informed consent, if you go to Fargo season 2, episode 4, it's called Fear and Trembling. It's just in, I think it's the first couple of minutes, there's a really interesting little scenario between a woman who's been diagnosed with cancer and her clinician here. So that's just an aside. So one of the first groups of researchers to take up this design was based in the University Medical Center in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And Leni Verkuken in 2012 set up the first TwiCs within her department, which specializes in looking at different types of cancer and radiation oncology. So she had some PhD students and we worked together, and they were great. The work that they did really helped evolve and make more clear this approach to trial design that John Nichol and I had come up with. So, and they introduced these terms, broad consent. So, which I thought was really useful. So that's just another plain English summary. And then Martin Burbeck and his colleagues in the Netherlands then wrote a paper called Staged Informed Consent Model for CMRCT, which is what TwiCs was known then. So here they talk about the staging of the information. So people are asked for broad consent for data collection, and then broad consent for randomization. And if they agree to take part, so they have the possibility of saying no at each stage. If they agree to take part, then they are eligible to be randomized to receive or not receive the experimental intervention. So this is an excellent paper published in Epidemiology by Danny Young-Affat in 2016. So this is some data I got from Leni last summer. So Leni Verkuken at University Medical Center about the cohorts that she's got now, that the TwiCs infrastructure she's set up in the hospital there. So that was a year ago. I think everything's increased by 1,000 or so. So she's now got a breast cohort, a rectal cancer cohort, colorectal, bone metastases, lymph node, brain metastases, prostate, and the lung one had just started up. So this is the number of patients who have joined these cohorts, and they are conducting, I think they've got about 9 or 10 trials that are up and running, and some more in the pipeline. This is some information they've been watching very carefully, the experiences of patients and the figures in terms of who consents for the different types of consents that patients who approach to take part give, and also the dropout rate. So here they've actually integrated the TwiCs infrastructure into the hospital. So when a patient actually receives their first appointment to see a clinician at University Medical Centre for with their oncologist, they first see one of the research clinician practitioners, and they're told about the research program, and they're asked if they want to take part, and that's before they see their clinician, and they're getting very high uptake. So that's a very interesting example. So over the years, one of the early questions that people asked was, well, is this ethical? Is it ethical not to tell people they're in a trial? So so what we decided to do was hold a symposium, an international symposium, to see if we could really nail this question down and see if we could get some answers that would be helpful to people who are worrying about using this new approach to trial design. So we brought together patients, clinicians, trialists, bioethicists from both the UK and the US, and ethics boards representatives to discuss their experiences, their thoughts about trials within cohorts, and how it related to the current ethical framework. So we had a great 2 days discussing and debating ethical issues, and we published a report on that. And the broad sort of the headline response was, well, yes, broadly, but as with every situation where it's about patient care, you have to consider the particular scenario that you're dealing with. So broadly speaking, yes, but you always have to consider each individual scenario. So yes, that was a really enjoyable and informative symposium. And hopefully the report on the symposium will be useful to people who are interested in understanding the broad range of ethical perspectives with regards to TwiCs. So I'm just going to go through a few examples now. I think there's something like, I'm not sure, I've got, I think it's 80 or 90 studies are now using this approach. One of the early ones was Target Kids, which is the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, run by Jonathan Maguire and colleagues. And there they adopted a similar approach to the University Medical Centre in the Netherlands, where every parent and child who came into the hospital were asked if they wanted to take part in Target Kids. So this was, again, embedding the TwiCs infrastructure into that hospital. More close to home, more recently, there's the Graham Roberts study, which is a TwiCs for bladder cancer, which has started. There's the Monitor one, which is looking at, I think, psoriatic arthritis, that's based in Oxford. Up in Sheffield, and mind you, it's a multiple collaboration. There's the CF Health Hub, which is looking at cystic fibrosis and creating a TwiCs platform for that. Closer to, then there's been some general population ones. So rather than recruiting clinical populations using the TwiCs model, these are general population-based cohorts. So Yorkshire Health Study was the first one over here in the UK. Cedar Project, that's an example of one over in Canada, where they're looking at drug abuse and interventions to help and prevent and mitigate challenges in a particular ethnic population. Forbo, this is a very interesting one, which is about preventing early interventions to prevent severe mental disorders in children. So It's well known that many of there are many predictors for severe mental illness in later life, and that these are visible early on. And so this is a project run by Dr. Rudolf Uhr over in Nova Scotia, where they have got together a TwiCs cohort of children and their families, and they are starting to test early interventions. You can imagine the conversation with the mother and the child would be very difficult if you said, actually, we're setting up something because we think your child might be at risk of severe mental illness in the future. You'd have to have a very carefully nuanced conversation. So they have staged the information in a way that is acceptable to parents and children at the particular stage in the early years. And then as they're identifying and testing interventions, then they have more nuanced conversations with those who are randomly selected to be offered interventions to prevent or reduce the risk of severe mental illness in later life. So it's a beautiful study, actually, very well thought through, and will no doubt provide some very useful information in the future. Bringing things rapidly up to date to our new COVID era, my colleague, Professor Adrian Martineau at Queen Mary University London, has set up Covidence, which is a population level cohort of people in the UK, adults who are at risk of higher risk of COVID. It was set up about 5 or 6 months ago. I think it already has over 25,000 people who've agreed and to join, and who are now providing monthly information on their COVID status, their general health, and a lot of information about risk factors around COVID, and also permission for linkage to their routine health records. So there's already some very interesting information coming out there, which is going to be published soon, particularly around vitamins, etc. So I just thought it would be good to actually talk about how TwiCs relates to all the other different types of trial designs that are there in our ecosystem of trial designs. So I talked about the TwiCs approach being basically a sort of architectural approach to how to create an infrastructure for trials of treatments where you want to compare the intervention to routine care, whatever that is, whether it's nothing or another routine intervention. There are other infrastructures that are using existing data and existing participant resources to conduct trials. So randomized registry trials, as we know, collect registries of patients who are using certain devices or seeing certain clinicians, etc. And then these are now being adapted used for trials. The Sweetheart, coronary heart disease trials in Sweden are the obvious early examples of that. And electronic health record trials, so Tjeerd van Staar up in Manchester and has pioneered this approach. Point of care trials as well, and administrative health record trials such as those that are ongoing in Canada. And then there are those that use bespoke infrastructures. So these are infrastructures where you recruit people with the specific purpose of doing research rather than for another purpose. So these other ones were for monitoring a particular intervention or device that had been used, or you can see the purposes of the existing resources is different from those which are bespoke infrastructures or infrastructures set up with bespoke purposes. So platform trials being the biggest one. Of course, we've got the recovery trial, recovery platform more recently. And as we know, basket trials actually is a whole wide range of trials that sit under the umbrella term of platform trials. So basket trials, umbrella trials, multi-arm, multi-stage trials. But these tend to be very disease-driven. They sit more at the explanatory end of the pragmatic explanatory spectrum. So it's more about stage 1, well, stage 2 and 3 trials rather than 3, 4 and 5, which is more the pragmatic end of things. And they're very often driven and funded by pharma. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is how we report trials. I was always intrigued by the fact that when I looked at my consort diagrams as I was learning about this new language of health research and how trials were designed and reported, that I was always intrigued by the fact that with huge numbers of people in this box who assessed for eligibility, so thousands, and then they got rapidly it reduced by the time you got here. You're quite often down to single figures. And I always wanted to know why. So we have these sort of boxes, which is really useful. But what was said to whom and how? And what were people thinking? Was it clinicians talking to people? What were people expecting? So I think in terms of understanding the change between the large top number and the small bottom number, this one being the difference between those randomized and those analyzed being the really important one in terms of the rigor of the deriving the benefits of the rigor of a randomized control trial. We always need to understand the context. Context is everything. So what was happening? This is really important for the generalizability of the results. So knowing whether the results of this particular trial are generalizable to my population, my setting. So one of the things that happened at the Ethics Symposium in 2016 was that we made a plea for a project to start developing guidelines for reporting trials within cohorts. So actually reporting the patient perspective on the consort flow diagram. So we were very lucky, and this was taken up by Brett Toombs and Linda Quackenboss over in Canada, and they obtained some funding through the Canadian Institute for Health Research, which was supplemented with small amounts of funding from the NIHR over here in the UK. And we got together an amazing international group of trialists and other people, other stakeholders in trials, to develop reporting guidelines, an extension to reporting guidelines for trials using cohorts, but also trials using routine health data. And as you can be well aware, these areas are merging. So that has finished, and the results of that are now have been submitted for publication. So hopefully sometime this year, the results will be out. So let's turn our minds now in the last 5-10 minutes thinking about, well, what's the future for trials? What do trials really need to do? I think COVID has sort of upended and is thawing a lot of the frozen elements that are of our ecosystem of trials, our architectures of trials, the way we run trials, all the different systems and rules we have that support but sometimes can constrain the rapid and efficient conduct of trials to produce evidence when we need it. So I've always found this statement in the world by the World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki about the ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. And this is I think on the first page. It's one of the key principles, but it's not often talked about. And it's that even the best proven interventions must be evaluated continually through research for their safety, effectiveness, efficiency, and accessibility and quality. Quite often trials seem to focus on either getting something to market, whatever that is, or and proving its effectiveness, but we don't actually move on to thinking, is it still effective? Is it as effective as other things? Is it as effective as new things? So, and how safe is it? So I think this is really important. And if we're going to have health systems and trial methodologies and trial infrastructures that actually are rapid, efficient, and ethical, we need to have health systems that learn from every patient. So this is Janet Woodcock, who's the ex-director of the FDA, Center for Drug Evaluation Research. She said way back in 2017, let's make generating this evidence a lot easier and randomizing within the care system as much as we can. And let's harness existing data sources such as electronic medical records to make decisions about products that more accurately reflect how patients actually use them. So that was a cry from a regulator from the FDA saying, hey, come on, let's create learning healthcare systems. So if we look forward to thinking, well, what type of trials do we need in it for learning health systems? We need health system populations which identify and recruit people, and then we need to work with the routine health data systems that collect outcomes, and then we need to have consent procedures within this that embed randomization within routine health system appointments, and that are funded by health systems so that everything is much more integrated. Of course, there's huge challenges for this. There's a lovely organization called Understanding Patient Data. They've done some fantastic research about what the population think and patients think about health data, the routine health data we collect. They've found, over half of people in the UK fear they might regret giving permission for their data to be used. And we know that a gulf exists between how people think the NHS is likely to use patient data and reality. A very big gulf. In all sorts of ways. We also know there's low awareness of how patient data is used beyond individual care, and only 20% of people feel sufficiently informed about how their data will be used. So there's a challenge for the public, which are for us and the public really. But I just wanted to talk about a couple of studies which are really starting to integrate trials within health systems. So this is a very exciting study called GenV, the Generation Victoria study. The statement of intent has just been published in the BMC Medical Research Methodology journal, and I would encourage you to have a look at that, as it's very exciting what they're doing. So they are every child and mother, every child born in Victoria, in the state of Victoria in Australia, starting I think sometime this year, will be approached to join Generation Victoria. And they're going to be running trials within Generation Victoria, but they're also going to be running trials alongside Generation Victoria. So there's going to be an integration of all trials conducted in Victoria. So there's going to be a general swapping of information. And they are using different types of consent models with regards to the trials that they're embedding within this system. So wave consent trials, and one of the models they're using is the TwiCs design, so Model 1C. So they're using TwiCs is embedded within a whole raft of trial designs that is being set up within the Generation Victoria infrastructure. And the second example I wanted to give is something that's much closer to home. So you've probably all heard of the Born in Bradford study. Over the years, they've set up various Born in Bradford studies. The third one, so if you go and look at their websites and things, it might be a bit confusing, but because they've used with each one, they've improved and slightly changed the focus of the work and the population they're recruiting and the methods they're using. The latest one is being led by Sally Bridges, and this is a sort of early website they've got if you're interested in going and have a look at what they're doing. So they've already recruited 3,000 infants to their e-birth cohort in Bradford. And here, what they're doing is every pregnant woman due to have their baby at Bradford Royal Infirmary is given the opportunity to become part of the project. Women are asked by their midwives during an antenatal appointment, and all the midwives are trained to take consent. They're asked if they will share routinely collected information about them and their baby during pregnancy and the following years. And then the Born in Bradford team will join this data together to look at ways to understand and improve health service provision in Bradford. And of course, it's voluntary, but they're finding that well over 90% of mothers are consenting. So I've been talking to Sally. So they've set it up in Bradford, but they are now extending it out to being a national they're creating a structure where different cities, different areas can feed into their infrastructure. So they would basically be duplicating their methods and adapting them to their particular scenario. So at Queen Mary, we're talking to them about having an East London or a Tower Hamlets or a London e-birth cohort using the same principles and embedded within the same sort of the same Earth birth cohort mothership. Sorry, that's my terminology, not Sally Bridges. So they've done some very important qualitative research, which has indicated that participants are very happy to have their electronic data linked in this way to help improve service provision within the city and to help understand what factors affect health and well-being. So I'm now starting a conversation with Sally about how much this, how much the TwiCs approach, which is this patient-centered approach for trials of interventions to improve health where the comparator is usual care, how much this element can be included in the e-birth cohort. And what we're proposing, what I've proposed to her, is that actually we do some more qualitative research to find out if participants are happy to have their linked electronic data used in what I'm calling chance trials. I don't know what the word is, which should be, but I think we need a new language. So to see if we can do that. So just thoughts for the future in the last few minutes. I think in terms of how we as researchers talk to the public and the media, we need to change that discourse. We need to, there's always this thing about, oh, there's a new trial of something happening. There's a new trial of a trial of a new intervention. And I've heard BBC broadcasters say, oh, there's a new trial of something. And then they talk as if the new intervention works before the study is actually even set up, before the trial's even set up. So there's this thinking this sort of common perception that, okay, if the NIHR and all these very clever people at these universities and these very clever doctors have all agreed that actually this is a promising idea to test, that it must work. But we know that actually 4 out of 5 trials have a negative result. And I think there's a slight element of falseness in terms of the discourse that's happening around trials. And I think we need to be more upfront. And I think the slightly misleading discourse that happens is one of the reasons why there is a lack of trust amongst the public with regards to their involvement in trials. And I think if we're a lot more honest and say, well, actually, we don't know the answer, but what we're going to do is we're going to do some randomization and then we'll let you know what happens. But that doesn't happen. And then the other thing is actually this thing about fully informed consent. I remember looking when I started in health research where the word full informed consent came from. So I was told by people who are a lot more experienced in health research that I had to make sure that I got fully informed consent. And I was thinking, well, where does the word full come? But it's not there. If you look in the Declaration of Helsinki or ICH DCP guidelines, etc., the NRES, the word full is just not there. What the words are that the information that's given and the consents that's sought is relevant and adequate for the patient and the clinician at that particular time. And the James Lind Priority Setting Partnership about the problems with recruitment to trials in the UK, their main finding was, well, from the public was how can we actually make sure recruitment to trials becomes part of routine care? So there's a real desire from the public for trials to become part of routine care. So if we manage to do this, to actually integrate these types of trials into actually have learning health systems, then we can have cheaper, faster trials, efficient full recruitment. We can evaluate multiple interventions, collect long and short-term outcomes of routine, and actually create learning healthcare systems. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, I'd be delighted to hear them.
Oh, thanks very much. That's brilliant, Claire. Loads of questions have arisen for me out of that, just thinking about the whole informed consent. We have a question here that came in from Hazel, and I'll just read it out to you. So Hazel says, thank you very much for the presentation, Claire. First time learning about TwiCs, and cohort studies help build an understanding of what factors increase or decrease the likelihood of developing a disease. With inserting an RCT into a cohort study, are we not interfering with the understanding of the very pathway the cohort study was set up to investigate?
That's a really good question. Yes, cohorts observe and trials experiment. But as we know, if we think about our situation in COVID, we can't just observe what's happening in the population. We actually need to test different types of interventions, and we need to do it rapidly and at scale. So we need to, if we're going to be really if we're going to be scientists in the full breadth of that term, we need to observe and experiment. So we can, in terms of embedding trials, experimental research within observational studies, you don't have to randomize everybody. So like we set up the Yorkshire Health Study, which the primary purpose was about improving long-term conditions, long-term health of people in Yorkshire. And then for each trial, we would identify those who might be eligible within that population. So like we ran a trial called DEPSI, which was a trial of a treatment by a homeopath for patients with depression. So we identified those within our large cohort who were at risk of, who were reporting moderate to severe depression. And not all of them agreed to take part, but most of them did. So yeah, so I think that they are combinable, but that's a very important point, and it is a challenge to integrate observation and experiment. You have to be very careful.
Yeah, yeah. We have another question as well from a participant, and they said, are you familiar with the CARE trials? And they've referenced a PubMed reference here. It says, which seem to involve random allocation of interventions and standard care before consent, a bit like Zealand's design.
Yes, I think there you might be referring to the point of care trials. This is where, yes, I'm familiar with that. So when a patient goes to the doctor, say with arthritis, and then the doctor opens up the patient's file, there's a flag which says this patient might be eligible for this arthritis trial, and then the doctor at the beginning of the consultation talks to the patient about the trial and says, are they willing to take part in the trial or not? So that's a point of care trial. There isn't, but it doesn't nuance, it doesn't stage the information. So, but it is more rapid approach to trials, but you don't have that patient-centered information, in that patients are still have to have this scenario thinking, well, if I agree to this, I might be offered this new treatment for arthritis, or I might not. And the clinician is faced with, actually, oh gosh, I've got to tell this patient I don't know what the best treatment is, and that we're going to have to toss a coin to decide whether Mrs. X gets this new treatment for her arthritis or not. So yes, so that's my understanding of point of care trials, if that's the reference that's been talked about there.
And just thinking, have you found there's been much or any pushback from clinicians about embedding the TwiCs?
Clinicians are extremely keen. In fact, it's interesting seeing the take up of this design has actually been led by clinicians and clinical teams, particularly those in hospitals and those in the area of mental health. Where it's really important what you tell people, how you tell people stuff, and when you tell people stuff. So no, clinicians are very, very excited about that. Actually, they're very interested. Yeah. So yes, there's a sort of sense of relief that they don't have to have awkward conversations with their patients.
Yeah. And just thinking then as well about the ethics side of things, how do ethics committees react to
yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, so certainly in the early years, so over the years, certainly in the early years, I sort of acted as a sounding board and a sort of information sharing point for people in the UK and around the world who are interested in using the design. And so I started to hear, and they tended to contact me when they said, well, we really want to do this. We think it's a great idea, but how do we approach the ethics committee? So there we would, so I sort of worked with them in terms of their experience of how they explained what they wanted to do, explained the design, and how they approach the ethics committees in the different countries. So, and that was very interesting. And so there were different approaches that were taken. And I mean, I run a sort of, there's a course that I do at Queen Mary where I can go more into that if people are really interested in the ethics approach in the ethical aspects and how to talk to ethics committees and how to approach that. But generally, we've found that we haven't had, I think we've had like one case over 10 years where the ethics board has just said no. There's sometimes had to be some negotiation, but generally it's like they've actually welcomed it.
That's great. And you mentioned about the Ethics Symposium from 2016 and the report. Where could we get hold of that report? Is it published freely available online?
If you just put Ethics of TwiCs Symposium into Google, it should come up.
All right, great. Yeah, that would be handy. Just check to see, do we have other questions? If anyone else has questions, please just type them into the box there. So just thinking then about money and costs, how much do the TwiCs cost, or who funds them?
Yes, it's $1 million question, isn't it? Yes, who funds trials? As we know who funds most trials at the moment, and it's a real challenge. So yes, and cost was one of the questions that was in our heads uppermost when we were thinking about this innovative approach to trial design. Way back in the early 2000s up in Sheffield. So there's always the cost of the infrastructure. So that's where if you actually can use an existing infrastructure and adapt an existing infrastructure, that keeps the cost down. And then there's the cost of actually running the trial. But it depends on the situation, I guess is my broad answer. I've seen quite a few TwiCs that have been set up and run by PhD students, so with minimal amounts of money. I've seen people throwing vast amounts of money. So like the Generation Victoria infrastructure is at the moment, I think 65 million Australian dollars. Wow. So it depends on the ambition, the scale, the existing resources and the plans that you have. So I've seen people who are clinicians just offering a small service in, so like a podiatrist over in one of the University College hospitals in London is setting one up on a shoestring. I mean, just a few £1,000s using her existing infrastructure and our expertise in TwiCs at Queen Mary.
Yeah. Wow. I just see Hazel's come back there with another question that might not be suitable for you, but for the TMRN. And it's with elements of TwiCs, do you think the health research regulations would allow elements of the study design discussed today, i.e. board consent? I think
probably not for me, is it?
Yeah, no, I mean, Hazel, I'll refer that onwards. Yeah. But definitely from speaking to different people in methodology at the moment, I think the whole issue of consent is really coming back up again, isn't it, with COVID? And I think there'll be a lot of thoughts about it. So hopefully I'll be able to get you a better answer than that.
Yes.
But we will get back to you on that.
Yes, I'd like to hear the answer.
Yeah, I'll look into my crystal ball. No, that's fantastic. So I think that's all the questions we have for you today. Claire, I think we've gone through them all. Oh, hi, there's your face. So it's been wonderful having you and really helpful. And also to let everyone know that you've very generously said that you'll share your slides. So that's always a question that we get asked. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
And if you have questions, please feel free to email me. And yeah, I suppose the other thing I wanted to mention is my PhD student, Bev Nicol, who I think is on the webinar, is at the moment leading a review of trials, of the use of how trials using cohorts, how studies have used the TwiCs approach. So if you want to know something about how this has been used in a particular area or are interested in methodological research around informed consent, then please do contact me and I'll put you in touch with Bev, who would be delighted to hear from you.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, all there is to say now is thank you so much for today. It's really helpful. And the recording of this webinar will be available online for anyone who wants to look at it again or direct their colleagues there. And that will be up probably sometime later this afternoon. And then I just got a few housekeeping reminders for anyone joining us. As I say, this is the first webinar of the year for the TMRN. Our next one's going to be on the 10th of February, and it's going to be with Dr. Darren Daly from UCC, University College Cork. And his title is How to Play Nicely with Your Trial Statistician and How to Get them to Play Nicely with You. So that's a great title. So we're looking forward to that. And then following that on the 3rd of March, we will be we'll have the Professor Carla Hemming from the University of Birmingham, and she's going to talk to us then about the use of multiple period cluster randomized crossover trial designs for comparative effectiveness and research. So that's on the 3rd. And then it's a packed lineup. As you can, we're all dying for these activities in lockdown. On the 4th of February, we've got a workshop running, which is using a person-based approach to planning and developing health interventions. And that's an association with Quests in Galway, and is led by a team from the University of Southampton. And then finally, we have a study day on the 10th of March about registry-based randomized controlled trials, uses, challenges, advantages and applications, and that's being led by Francis Sheely and the team at the CRF and UCC. So loads going on. So all there is to say now is thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you back on the 10th of February. And Claire, thank you very much for your lovely presentation today. Goodbye now.